So what I want to do is go ahead and get your Bibles and turn to 1 Samuel. And I'm going to kind of walk through some of this, but let me go to, you can go ahead and turn to 1 Samuel 8. And I'm going to begin to talk a little bit about the life of David. You know, we've been, over the last 2-3 months, we've talked a lot about spiritual warfare. We've talked a lot about the main weapon we have in the midst of the spiritual warfare, and that main weapon being truth. We've talked about that. We've talked about, last week we even talked about rest. Did you guys have a restful week after that? I saw Billy resting yesterday. Yeah? The kids, Abby's got the kids now already. They've already left, yeah. And so we've talked about that. We've talked about those things, and what I've been thinking is it's here we're seeing all these, as we've talked about that, we've seen all these principles, and now what I want to do is begin to kind of walk through the life of David, because I think what we can see there for a little while, and I think for a while, because I think what we can see there is begin to see these principles in action, and I don't know how it is for you. Like I can hear principles, but when I can understand that in story form and really see it and see it manifested, see what it looks like exactly, then maybe I can even understand it a little bit better. And so that's what I want to do. And I think that David is a good place to start for this, because we know a little bit about the life of David. We know what I see in him is we see a man who's maybe his emotions run the gamut. Anybody in here ever felt happy? Anybody in here ever felt sad? Anybody in here ever felt threatened? Anybody in here ever felt secure? Anybody, that's David. David feels all these things. And what we see in the life of David is not only a guy whose emotions kind of run that gamut, but we see, as we begin to refer to Psalms that he's written, we can also begin to see how it is what it is, we see God's heart toward him in all this. And so he's a guy who is not unlike us. He's a guy who's experienced some ups and downs, right? His emotions are running the gamut. He's experienced some ups and downs. There's times when when things are going well, and there's times when things aren't going really well at all. How many of you guys experienced some ups and downs? I have not. It's been all up for me since I was 20, and we sometimes I think we have this perverted gospel where it's like I understand that I come to the Lord and there's forgiveness and there's cleansing, and I understand that not only that, but that he's got a plan for me. I understand that there's a destiny that lies in front of me. I understand that there's all these good things happening, but experientially what I've kind of seen is some of this. Now, and so I'm thinking that we're looking at a guy here, David, who experiences some of that, and maybe we can identify with that. We see also in the life of David, and I think this is maybe most important, we see also in the life of David a guy who's not perfect. Now, how many of you guys would say, since I gave my life to the Lord, it's been pretty much sinless perfection since then? Am I the only one? Well, we see in the life of David a guy who his emotions run the gamut, his life experience is kind of up and down, and we see in the life of David a guy who makes a lot of mistakes, but also a guy who is proclaimed as a man who's after God's own heart. And so what I want to do is make the assumption that, as we're kind of walking through this, that we're looking at David to see how it is these principles of spiritual war and these principles of living in and fighting with truth, and these principles of rest, even how all that plays out in the midst of real ordinary life, where emotions are up and down and where life experience is quite varied and where we often screw up. And because I think we can see in that how this begins to play out in our own lives, since he is so much like us, and he practices so much of what we've been talking about. So I'm going to do this in 3 ways. First, what I'll do is kind of help us understand maybe a little bit of some of the history in the life of David, because I think that history kind of gives us context. Who would understand that a lot of what you what is going on at any moment in your life is very influenced by and very colored by your history, right? And so that would be true for the life of David. So we'll look at some of the history and get some of the context. I think that we can see even some lessons as we look through that history. And then also what we'll do is in each week with this, and we'll look at some particular events in the life of David, because these events, not all the events in the life of David, they're pretty numerous, but these events will give us some particular significance as to what's going on there. And then more importantly, maybe most importantly, I think it's kind of cool in the life of David, and I haven't seen this done before, but in the life of David, to not only look at historically in context what's going on there, and then specifically at this event in the life of David, but then compare some of that with the Psalms that he's written, because this begins to give us insight into the heart of God, right? And so, like, what is the heart of God when I'm in a situation where I'm way up here? And what's the heart of God when I'm in a situation where I'm way down here? What's the heart of God when I'm in a situation where, man, I'm doing pretty good? And what's the heart of God when I'm in a situation where I just blew it? What's the heart of God when I am happy and joyful? And what's the heart of God when I'm really struggling with some depression and some anxiety? You starting to understand what I mean? Because what we really want to see, because the cure in all this is an understanding and a recognition of the heart of God. So I think if we look at the life of David and see the Psalms that he's written during these times, then we can begin to reveal, what can begin to unwrap for us is what God's heart is for us, and we get a full picture of what he is. So I'm thinking that this series, and it may take us a while to get through it, but I'm thinking this series is really kind of a theocentric look at the life of David. Does that make sense? Because that theocentricity is what really brings and gives understanding to us. It's what helps us begin to fight the lies. I think one thing we see in the heart, we have been saying, look, we're going to fight lies with truth, right? Taking every thought captive and replacing it with truth. It's like that's how I fight it, is to replace that lie with truth. And so what we want to get out of this discussion about David a little bit is this truth that we can begin then to replace the lies that the enemy tries to spin to us. Because remember what we've been saying, and that is that one of the primary points at which the enemy will attack you and attacks me in my mind is at the point of who God is, right? And I think we're going to see in the heart of David and in the heart of God towards David, I think we're going to see a really clear picture of God's heart toward us. And then we have ammunition to fight what the enemy's trying to spin in our mind. Does that make sense? Make sense? Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So I'll start with tonight's history lesson. And not always we'll do this, but first I just want to kind of back it all up just a little bit and understand what it is that's kind of preceding the event we're going to talk about tonight, which is the God's choosing of David and his anointing as king, right? That'll kind of start things off for us, but to understand in a historical context what it is it means. So, who remembers Abraham? What do you know about Abraham? All right, that's okay. Abraham is. Do you remember how old when the baby comes? Do you remember, Joy? You're more of a Bible scholar than me, huh? Not yet. So he's an older guy. He's older than me, if you can believe that. Well, I've been married 29 years. Now Abraham was married a long time, and you're right, even longer than me. But Abraham is about 2000 BC, and he is the father of this chosen nation that God chooses for Himself, right? And so that's Abraham, and about 400 years after Abraham comes Moses. And there was a need for Moses because as Abraham fathers his people of God, they prospered, they grew to a point where they became a threat to Egypt, and they become a threat. And so because they become a threat, they end up in captivity, maybe for some other reasons, but they end up in captivity, and about 400 years after all that, in 1600 BC, then here comes Moses, who is going to be this deliverer for the people of God, right? He delivers the people of God out from Egypt, which is a great study. Lots of types and lots of foreshadowing in that. And he delivers the people of God out from Egypt. We see that in Exodus, and then along comes Joshua, who begins to then conquer, or be the leader who begins to conquer the promised land. Right? You with me so far? This history. So here's Joshua, and then from about 1500 BC to about 1100 comes this period of the judges. We don't really preach about that and talk about that a lot, but it's a really interesting part of Israel's history because of the government that is established, and I think it might even be, I don't want to go too far with that, but maybe even the suggestion of what government obviously it's a suggestion of what government we will all become. There's a lot who think that, America is a republic, a democracy, or something. Was it a Republican or a democracy? Say it again. A democratic republic. Obviously, this is from God. Well, I don't know. God's used it. It's been awesome. It may be changing, but it's been awesome. And up to this point, but really what God established here for his people was a theocracy. Right? And so sometimes I think the ties we might make between America and Israel, they don't necessarily blend like we think they do, because Israel was established as a theocracy. This country never was. Certainly God was a part of it and all that, but it was never. And so that was what was going on with Israel, and this theocracy was carried out by these judges. However, if you really look into that part of the Old Testament history, what you see is that through this period of judges and the promised land is being established, there are, they're kind of spread out there, and it's really kind of a tribal system, and when I go to Africa sometimes, I can be like, what's been interesting to me is I remember we flew into South Sudan one time, and we had contacts through this kind of one faction there in South Sudan, and he was the guy that was kind of the big leader. His name was John Garang, and so we flew in there, and we just assumed that all of South Sudan was united as they fought against this evil Muslim dictatorship from the north. And so as we dropped into South Sudan with permission from these guys who were attached to John Garang, we landed in one particular area, we weren't sure what we were going to find there, and as the plane landed, all these people kind of began to, we knew we were in trouble, because as we landed, all these people began to kind of emerge from the woods, or from the bush, and they didn't look happy to see us. I had been in South Sudan at points, and man, people are just celebrating that you're there, and this is all awesome. But as these guys came out from the woods, they weren't happy to see us at all. And they kind of had frowns on their face, and very stern and very serious. And so they took us into custody. And I was thinking, well, we must be in the custody. Maybe these guys are Muslim. They had these kind of robes on. And so I didn't know a whole lot. And I just think, well, this is going to get interesting. We came to find out they were not They were not Muslim. They were just a different faction in South Sudan. In fact, the people we came in under their authority, this tribe was really the cousins of this particular tribe, but they were factionalized, and they were tribal in their orientation. And if you really, I think this is true, you can check me on this if you guys want to go study some ancient Israeli history. Like as Joshua begins to capture and lead and take the promised land, and the tribes began to kind of spread out over that, and each one had their own assigned territory, they were factionalized. At times they didn't even get along with each other, right? And so there was this period of the judges, and out of that kind of a backdrop comes to where we start here in 1 Samuel 8, and there is this cry out for a king. Okay? And so here comes 1 Samuel 8, verse 20, and basically here's what they're saying. The people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel, who was telling them, look, guys, you really don't want a king. And they refuse to listen to his voice, and they say, no, but we want a king. There shall be a king over us. Verse 20, so that we may be like all nations. Right? They want to be like everybody else. We want to be like all nations. This whole theocracy with the judges has produced this factionalism. That's not what produced it, but that's in their head. This whole theocracy with judges who are administrating that have produced this factionalism, and we want to be like all other nations. We want a king who will judge us and go out before us. And then check this last line. He will go out before us and he will fight our battles. Well, God's trying to tell them, but they're saying this is what other nations are. We've seen the pattern where a king goes and he unifies a people, and they come against us, and it's difficult for us to do it, and it's hard. And we want to be like all these other guys. We want unity. We want protection. We want this king that is going to fight our battles. Lesson number 1 from history. This is for free. It's not really even part of the message. But lesson number 1 from history here, I think it was Thomas Jefferson. Where's Jake? You might have to help me with this. I can't remember who made this quote. I think it was Thomas Jefferson, who says, when you get, am I right when he says, when you get a government big enough to meet all your needs, it's also big enough to take everything you have. Was that Jefferson? Thank you very much. So that lesson number 1 from history, what was true for the nation of Israel here as they cry out for this king to unify them or to protect them or to fight their battles, is when you get the government big enough to meet all your needs, it's also a government that's big enough to take everything you have. It kind of smells like some stuff going on in our country these days. Lesson number 2 for history, from history, and I think this one may also have a familiar smell to it. They sought political they sought political unity rather than allowing their faith to unify them. Right? Do you know there is some even bodies of believers, the ecclesia, the called out ones, who go to unify around their faith and allow politics to divide them? Is that crazy? I think it's crazy. That's what's happened here. That's what happened in Israel's history, and I think this sounds familiar to us because, look, guys, we are more and more. I'm convinced of this. Although I was very convinced of it a year ago, I'm even more convinced of it now. Like we live in the middle of interesting days right now, and I don't know what's going on around us. Whether it is, I don't know whether it's just. And I'm not talking about a particular party, and I'm not talking about a particular leader, but I'm telling you what the government that is surrounding us. I don't know if they're just inept or if there's calculated decisions being made. I don't know. And hear me when I say, I know there's here sitting in front of me. I know there's some Republicans in the crowd who'd be like, "Yep, that guy in office. I mean, you're right about that, Dave." Well, thank you. I believe I am. And I know that there are some Democratic folks here who are saying, "Yep, those fundamentalists, you're right about that, Dave." Well, thank you. I believe I am. And if I'm wrong, then maybe go back and research some of what John Ashcroft did after 9/11. Like, look, we will not find unity and victory in all that is occurring around us in these interesting days at a political level. I'm not saying politics are wrong. I'm not saying we're supposed to not engage in politics, of course. But we're not going to find unity there. We'll find unity in our faith. And our answer will arise out of that as opposed to the politics that surround us. Is that making sense at all? So that's lesson number 2 in history. And that's kind of what happens with Israel. But let's kind of move forward, because here in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 20, we read that. There's this cry for a king. God relents and gives them what they want. And then if we kind of push forward in Samuel, we're getting to the life of David. If we kind of push forward in Samuel, what we see in 1 Samuel 9, 10, and 11 basically is that Saul is chosen and he's put into office. And then we see in 1 Samuel 12 that basically Saul begins his reign. He's coronated as king and he begins his reign. And then we get to 1 Samuel 13, basically where Saul commits this sin against the Lord, and there are some repercussions. And it's out of this that David's going to come, right? What's that sin? Well, it says in you can turn there, 1 Samuel 13. It says in verse 13, and Samuel says to Saul, "You have acted foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you." Now, the Lord would have. You ever think about that? I'm going to tell you an interesting thing to do in the Scripture. Just look up the phrase "would have." If you think our actions don't matter, look in Scripture and find a bunch of would-haves. There's a bunch of them in there. And in this instance, what he says is, look, your kingdom shall not endure. The Lord has sought, he kept the commandments of the Lord for which he commanded for you now. The Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. That's a pretty big would have. Even in the life of David that we're going to talk about, there's some would haves in there, right? But he says here, your kingdom would have been established over Israel forever, but now your kingdom shall not endure. Your kingdom shall not endure. The Lord has sought out for himself a man after God's own heart, and the Lord has appointed him as ruler, right? And so we're seeing this in 1 Samuel 13, and we're going to see this in 11, 18, 19. We see this, and so if you look over 1 Samuel 15, 28, what God says there, as he looks for this person after God's own heart, what he says there comes to fruition. And so Samuel says to him, 15:28, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, and has given it to your neighbor. It comes to be. One point I want to make here is, as we're looking at the last lesson from history, and then we'll move on to the life of David. But one thing, when Saul takes the throne when he's about 40 years old, most commentators would say. And when this sin occurs, and there's actually a couple that happen there, and when this all occurs and this proclamation is made, Saul is at that time probably about 55 years old. Most commentators would say. A.W. Pink, if you get interested in any of this stuff, it's really rich, man. Life of David. If you get A.W. Pink is kind of the definitive work on the life of David. So at 55, this proclamation is made that this king, he was going to lose his kingdom. 17 years later, he loses his kingdom. All right? Now that's interesting to me. I'm an American. I want justice right now. You follow me? Like the rest, and I want you to understand too that Eastern cultures, Middle Eastern cultures, they don't think like we do. They don't think like we do. I was in where was I? I was in Baghdad, and we were talking to this guy, and he said to me, he said to me, your country will fall at our hands. And I said, oh, that's interesting. So why is that? He said, because you think differently than we do. I said, well, I'm kind of aware of that, but like, what do you mean specifically? He said, let me tell you a story. I want to tell you a story about two Middle Eastern men, and they were neighbors, and they had some grievances, and they didn't get along real good. And one day, neighbor A backs out of his driveway and hits neighbor B's son, kills him. And so neighbor A runs to neighbor B, and he says to neighbor B, I'm so sorry that I've hurt your son. I apologize. And neighbor B says, no, it's okay. It's I understand. It was an accident. All's forgiven. It was an accident. So neighbor B's son then grows up and has a son who has another son who in the end retaliates and kills neighbor A's grandson. And neighbor A says, why did you act so quickly? Do you understand the difference in that paradigm? Like, we want and expect justice right now. There's an understanding in that culture, which is very similar to what the culture we're talking about here. There's an understanding that sometimes revenge and justice take lots of time. And my friend, not sure he was a friend, but my associate, well, he wasn't an associate. I hope Homeland Security's not taping this. This guy I was talking to, don't put that on the web. Yeah, he wasn't an associate. This guy I was talking to understood that in the mind of America, justice would be performed in a year or so, and then we'd forget all about it. But in the mind of the Middle East, that's not what would happen. And that's part of what we're up against these days, right? We think justice has been served because the bombers in Boston have now been arrested. Justice, they hadn't even begun yet. And so that's the weakness that's being exploited. Look, at 55, it is prophesied, and the Lord works with us this way. Here's the main point. The Lord works with us this way. At 55, Saul is told, this kingdom will be ripped from your hands. 17 years later, this kingdom is ripped from his hands. Okay? Lesson 3 from history is, sometimes because we expect immediate justice, we think that he is sleeping. You understand what I'm saying? Sometimes we think he's sleeping because we want justice now. I want to tell you that he is not asleep. He's not asleep. Maybe he has reasons for his timing. Maybe he's given Saul a chance for a heart change. Maybe there's even something else going on parallel to that, like David's preparation. And so he is not sleeping. His timing is not ours. And I think we need to hang on and understand that, because I strongly believe, and I think we need to understand that in his time, righteousness will rule. Let me say it again, because this helps me sleep at night. I've been exposed to a lot in Congo and Sudan and Baghdad and Yemen and Pakistan and northern India, in southern India. I've seen a lot that makes me want to cry out for justice. And I'm beginning to see a lot in our country that makes me want to cry out for justice. And that's cool, like, cry out for justice. But understand that his timing is different than ours. And if we can understand that, we have something that maybe allows us to sleep at night and have some peace in the process. Is this making sense? Okay, so that's lessons from history. And now I want us to jump, though, because really pertaining to like our own faith and understand who God is. Like, let's get into the life of David a little bit. So we see this emergence of David in 1 Samuel 13 and 14. And I just read this. God is looking, this kingdom shall not endure. And so God seeks out for himself a man after his own heart, and God appoints him ruler. Well, that's an interesting thing here, that he would appoint David ruler before there's ever any acknowledgement of that on David's part, right? And so what I want you to see here is right here in verse 14, this proclamation of who David is. How does he identify him? This initial proclamation of him. How does he identify him? Verse 14. You with me? Huh? Did I lose you on all the politics? Huh? A man after. So this first proclamation the Lord makes about David here in 1 Samuel 13 is that he is a man after God's own heart. And then I just want to call to your attention, the last proclamation that God ever makes about David, we find in Acts. It's Acts chapter 13, verse 22, and here the proclamation about David, some 1,000 years later, after David has died, this proclamation is, and after he removed him, he raised up David to be their king. Concerning him, he also testified and said, I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. So God's first proclamation of David is that he was a man after God's own heart. David lives out his life, he dies, and 1,000 years later, God's proclamation of David is what? He's a man after God's... Okay, you're still awake? All right, so he's a man after God's own heart. I think that's amazing that this first proclamation of David, some obscure shepherd boy at the age of 15, when the proclamation is made, at the age of 15, some poor kid out watching sheep, very much off the scene. It's not like Bethlehem was the center of activity for the known world, and he wasn't even in Bethlehem. He was out in the field somewhere, and he's 15 and he's obscure and he's watching these sheep, and I think that's a profound proclamation, that God would search out and find this guy, right? But I'll tell you what's more profound. What's more profound is the last proclamation in the book of Acts. Because this last proclamation comes after all of David's mistakes. It comes after all of his lies and his compromise. It comes after his adultery with Bathsheba. It comes after his murder of Uriah. after all that, God's proclamation of David still is, he continues to make the same proclamation that this is a man after my own heart. What is going on? Like if I'm making my judgment and my assessment, right? If I'm making my judgment and my assessment, I'm not sure I'm going to draw the same conclusion I did back when that boy was 15. I mean, I've watched this 15-year-old lie, be deceitful, commit adultery, and then murder somebody. I'm not sure I'm still thinking that this is a man after God's own heart. Are you? But God does, and I think this is lesson number one from not history, but from the life of David. Lesson was this can begin to give us some insight into what God values and some insight into who He is. Right? One insight is this, like, guys, can we come to an understanding, like I think this is so important in our day. Can we come to an understanding that God is not just some rule maker and scorekeeper? He's not a rule maker and a scorekeeper. Ultimately and primarily what He is He's a lover who is seeking after people who have a heart for Him. Is this making sense? Sometimes we look at the Old Testament, I think we make a mistake here. We look at the Old Testament and we go, look, see how God worked here, and He's making rules, and that's the Old Testament law. And now we come to the New Testament, and Jesus has freed us from this evil God. And now it's all grace. It's like, no, it's all one story. And what we can understand about this story is God is not, whether we're looking at the Old Testament or the New Testament, you see it in the life of David. He's not just a rule maker who's keeping score, ready to pounce on us when we fail. Instead, the overarching picture of God, whether you're talking about New Testament or Old Testament, is that He's just a lover who's looking for somebody who's seeking after His own heart. Right? So that's kind of lesson number one, and I think a pretty important one. I don't know. Does anybody else here find encouragement from that? Like I do, because I'm a lot like him. I find some encouragement. I find some comfort in there. So this proclamation is made in chapter 13, and then if you flip on over to chapter 16, you see that God finds what He's looking for. So look at chapter 16, verse 1. Now the Lord says to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have selected a king for myself." Remember what he said. I'm going to find somebody who's after my own heart. Well, He's selected him. And now he goes and finds him. He finds him in this little place called Bethlehem. And this is one reason I really so much identify with David. All the sons are rolled through, and they can't find him. And then comes David, and it says, "So he sent, and he brought him in. Now he was ruddy with beautiful eyes and a handsome appearance." Now I can identify with that. It's not that funny, Kev. Come on, buddy. No, I'm kidding. So now he finds him, and he brings him in this ruddy appearance with beautiful eyes and handsome appearance. And the Lord says, "Arise and anoint him, for he is he." And so Samuel takes the horn of the oil and anoints him in the midst of his brothers. Interesting that phrase is in there. Samuel takes the horn of oil and anoints him in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord comes mighty upon David from that day. From that day forward. So you see the picture here. David is unaware. God makes this proclamation back in 15. I'm looking for a guy who's after my own heart. David's unaware of that. He's 15 at the time. He's out watching some sheep on the outskirts of far from the center of the world in Bethlehem, and he's totally unaware of that. But he is there at 15 with apparently at least the seeds of a heart that burns after God. And so even while David is there, I want you to notice something here. God finds him. It's like, can any good come out of Nazareth? Can any good come out of Vinton? Like, God finds it, even in obscure places like Vinton or Salem, something like that. He finds this guy way out in Bethlehem, and what I want to get here, David's there just kind of watching the sheep. He is not there establishing a platform for himself. Right? Hey guys, when I look at, well, maybe I shouldn't say that. I won't say that. I'll just say David is not there establishing a platform for himself. He's not there. He's not out in Bethlehem on the edge of it watching sheep, campaigning for office. He's not strategically giving press releases that would begin to elevate him and control circumstances. I like to call it hint faith. You know what hint faith is? It's like, Lord, I got faith that you're going to provide. I trust you. But let me throw out some hints so that your people are aware of it. Right? David's not doing this. He's not engaged in some kind of hint theology. He's not establishing a platform. He's just there with a heart for God, and God's seeking a heart like that, and so he finds it. God orchestrates it all with absolutely no help from David. And I want to tell you guys, I believe we can learn from that. So I thought lesson number 2 from the life of David is, I think it might help us to stop trying to help him fulfill our destinies. And instead, maybe we need to just go tend some sheep and allow the seeds that he's planted in our heart to develop and respond to our lover. And he'll come find us when he's ready for us and as we're prepared. Is this making sense? God orchestrates it all with no help. And I think it might help us if we do that. The truth is, if we engage and begin to try and help him as he fulfills our destinies, the truth is we probably, most likely, are just going to mess it up. All right, I'm old enough to know. I've seen it in my life several times, and I'll be honest enough to tell you that when I begin to get a picture, and it may even be an accurate picture of what God's destiny or what his plan is for a phase in my life, as I begin to get that picture, as I rush in there to try to help him out a little bit, that's usually about the time it gets screwed up. And probably I'll eventually get there, but it could have been a whole lot easier road to get there if I hadn't felt like I had to help him out. Is that making sense? And I think that's what we're seeing there. So God seeks after this man with his own heart in chapter 13. He finds him in chapter 16. David at the time is 17 years old. And what I want you to understand and what I want us to know from the life of David, and I think there's a lesson in this, is at 17, we see this in chapter 16, he is anointed as king. Samuel takes the horn of oil and anoints him in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord comes mightily on David from that day, and he is anointed as king. And 20 years later, at age 37, he becomes king. And lesson number 3 is this. Look, and I think we need to remember this, particularly when we get a prophetic word, or we get from the Lord even a word about our destiny. Remember, there is often a gap between a word being established and a word that is realized. Now watch this part, because this is not my favorite part. The question might be, why is that? Why is it the Lord gives me a word and then I can begin to see its fulfillment about 15 years later? Like, why is that? Well, here, what's happening, I think, if you understand the whole story, here what's happening is David is being prepared. And often that is the case even for people as holy and as good as me. I might get this word, but as I see it, I really realize there might be a pretty large gap there because the Lord's doing some preparation. Now here's the part I don't really like. I think we need to notice in the story of David that David's preparation comes at the hands of Saul. David's preparation, check it out, come at the hands of a demonized king. Now isn't that cheery? Preparation is a fun time. These seeds that are in David's heart, this man after God's own heart, these seeds are harvested and brought forth by a demonized king. Look, guys, preparation is not so much fun all the time. And I want to tell you that probably even for us, as we deal with family dysfunction, with demonized bosses, with financial challenge, with a thorn in flesh, whatever that might be, it's not so fun. But I think we need to realize it for what it is. It's preparation. And it is the thing, this thing we're dealing with, whatever it is. And it's different for all of us. But this thing we're dealing with, here's a quote from Dave you can take to the bank. This thing is the thing that is harvesting the seeds that God has put in your heart to position you for the destiny to which he has called you. So don't despise it. Understand it. Understand what it is and understand that there's a process to that. So we're seeing, as we kind of walk through this anointing as David's king, basically what we're seeing, I think here, guys, is David, who is a prototype of a man who sincerely wants God. Right? A man after God's own heart. Old Testament, New Testament. We're not talking about two different stories here. Jesus basically comes along and says the same thing. He says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Jesus says, blessed are the gentle, for they're the ones who will inherit the earth. Jesus says, look, blessed are the pure in heart, because they're the ones who will see God. And that's what we're seeing in David, this prototype of a man, a weak man. I think, outside of his ruddy and handsome appearance, which I strongly identify with, outside of that, my real identification with David is he is a weak man. But he also, and I identify with this part, he is a weak man who sincerely wants God. And it's his weakness. It's that poverty in spirit. Look, I'm telling you, man, I listen, this is not, we ain't preaching this in some circles today. I'm not to name the circles, but look, we can be around some solid teaching or what seems to be solid, and there's never any mention of just pure in heart and poverty in spirit, man. I think there's a problem with that. And it's all about our destiny and how we're going to fulfill this destiny, and it's about how God's going to make us rich, and it's about how we're kings and priests. And I'm telling you, dude, that stuff sounds good, and it kind of tickles my ears too. But when we look at the life of David, what we're really seeing is a weak man who, through the circumstances of life and through the flux of his emotions, was brought to a place where he was poor in spirit, which allowed him to inherit the kingdom of God. What it produced in him was a gentility. Don't you know that the demonized king that he served under, he learned as he was serving under this king to be gentle? And it was that gentility that allowed him to inherit the earth, inherit everything that God had for him. Like, don't you know that when he was being chased by Saul, and he's got his band of merry men, sort of, and they're running around from cave to cave just to try to avoid getting whacked. Like, don't you know that in the midst of that, there develops in him a purity of heart that allows him to really see God? See, what we want to do sometimes is to short circuit and circumvent that process. What we want to do, or I don't know about you, what I want to do is, I don't want to deal with a demonized boss. You know? I don't want to deal with family dysfunction. I don't want to deal with financial difficulty. I don't want to deal with all that. I just want my destiny, man. I just want what's coming to me. And I'm telling you guys, I'm telling you, there's some preaching out there that tickles our ears at that point, and it's wrong because it's incomplete. And there is no way, as we're seeing in the life of David here, there is no way to circumvent that process. And it's often true that for those things to be developed and prepared in us that will allow us to really work out and walk in the destiny the Lord has for us, for those things to really happen, that it often takes a demonized king to bring it out. Sorry, but it's just the way it is. I want to close with this. I'm going to turn to Psalms. This is you can turn if you want. It's Psalm chapter 60. And I'm just trying to get a little glimpse here. We said we want to look at what is God's heart, what is his character. This is a psalm David writes, and I'm just going to read a couple verses here. And David writes this, beginning to understand the heart of God and all this kind of stuff. Thou hast given a banner to those who fear thee, that it may be displayed because of the truth. But now check out verse 5. That thy beloved may be delivered. What David learned about the heart of God, and what I think we can learn about the heart of God, since our circumstances is similar, at least in principle, what David learned about the heart of God as he labored in service under this demonized king, and as he did this emotional kind of roller coaster, and as his life circumstances were constantly changing, as he realized that there is a period of time between the delivery of a word and the realization of it. What David really learned there, he learned about the heart of God, and what he learned is that God's heart was to him was, I want my beloved, I want the one I love, I want him to be delivered. What he learned about God's heart is, he learned what we were saying a minute ago, and I'll just touch on this just briefly again. What he learned is God ultimately, what God is God is a lover. And if we can catch anything out of the story of David, understand about God's heart, like, can we understand that God is a lover? How many of you guys have ever been in love before? I'm hoping all married folks will raise their hands. God is a lover. If you've ever been in love, what we understand about love is that love always, I won't say that. Okay, love always desires a response, right? So this is really simple. When we start seeing and understanding God's heart, we in this notion that he's looking for a man after his own heart, it's because at the very core of his nature, he is a lover. He is in love, and love desires a response. And so his love desires a people who want to be lost in his beauty and in his goodness. I don't understand it. Honestly, I don't understand it in my own life, and I don't understand it in what I see around me sometimes. I don't understand it. Why it is that I care about anything other than being lost in his goodness and his beauty. Nothing else really compares. And that's really what he's looking for. He's not a rule keeper. He's not trying to watch you closely enough that when you begin to step on, he can smack you down. No, he's a lover, and he's looking for a people who just desire to be lost in his beauty and his goodness, and live lives of discovery of it, and who just want to be his beloved. He's looking for a response. And this is why in the life of David, God's like, look, I'm going to find me a king. I'm going to find me somebody who's really going to walk out their destiny. Oh, really, Lord? Like, how are you going to find that? How are you going to determine that? Simple. I'm not looking for a perfect man. I'm not looking for a man who is, in the eyes of the world, is qualified. I'm not even looking for a guy that anybody else would notice. I'm just looking for a guy. I am love, and my heart is love, and that's who I am, and that's what I'm about. And so because I'm a lover, I'm just looking for a guy who will respond to me. Is this making sense? And so when I can find me, he probably doesn't say it that way because his grammar's better than mine. But when I can find someone, sorry, you're an English teacher, I apologize. But what he's saying is, when I can find someone who I can see the seeds in their heart, that I know they will respond to my love, not my rules. When they will respond to my love, then I'm going to find somebody who can really walk out their destiny, and who, while they are not perfect, and while I understand that I know they're going to make mistakes, I know they will continue to respond to me and understand that I love them. That's the guy. That's the guy I'm going to make king. Like, what I think is, I don't have all the answers, but I do know this. Lovers want the object of that love to respond and to have a heart for him. What kind of church would God require us to become? That's my Joel. What was his name? Joel. He had that magic voice. I'm trying to be like that. What kind of church is God looking for us to become? I think he's just looking for a body of people who understand that they are the object of his love and really want to respond to that. In essence, they have a heart for him. I don't know how many committees we're supposed to have. I don't know what kind of ministries are supposed to operate and run. I don't know, man. Could be a bunch, could be none, could be a couple. I don't know. I'm not real, good on all that stuff. I don't know. But I do know that if we individually, and if we as a body, as a corporate group, I do know that I am absolutely convinced that if we will allow that we, as the objects of his affection, will simply respond to that, like, he'll do something great, man. And I'll tell you the truth, man. Can I just tell you, like, as time goes on, can I just be honest? I'll tell you, like, I am really, I mean this, like, I'm really grateful. I'm really thankful to be a part of this body and a part of what he's doing here. Like, I really am, man. I feel like, I don't know how you guys feel. Like, I feel like I've come home after a long 10-year walk. And I like a walkabout. When my kids were little, we used to do walkabouts. And we'd go walking, and sometimes it might take a few hours. And the kids thought that was really cool because they don't know where they're going. And the truth was, I didn't really know where we were going. We just started walking. It's a walkabout. That's what walkabouts are for, You don't have to have a plan. We're just going to have an adventure. That's what I tell them. Where are we going, Dad? We don't have a plan. We're just going to have an adventure. We're going to do a walkabout. And they like that, so we just go walkabout. I can't remember what I was saying now to understand why that. Anyway, like, I have no clue what I was talking about. But, I feel like I have been on a 10-year walkabout. And the walkabout was full of adventure, and that was cool. And the walkabout wasn't always easy, and that's the way walkabouts are. But now, like, I feel like finally, every once in my kids, I always knew, like, okay, we're going to end up at somewhere to eat because they would be hungry after their walkabout, And it turns out that the walkabout, the highlight of the walkabout was not really the walkabout. The highlight of the walkabout is when we got the burgers at the end, I kind of feel like I got into the burger at the end, man. And like, I've been on this walkabout, but like and that was okay, and it's fun, it's adventuresome, but what's really cool is coming home. And so I don't know how you guys are feeling, and I'm excited about that. I like that. And I tell you, man, I think that I find myself in the midst of some people who are like me and who aren't perfect, but who really at least want to respond to their lover. You know what I mean? Like, I don't always know how to respond to my lover, but like, I want to. And sometimes I'm afraid to respond to my lover, but I want to. And I don't even worry about that. I used to, but I don't even worry about that so much anymore because I think my lover sees my heart and will help me when I'm afraid and will tell me what to do when I don't know what to do. And I think not only have I gotten home, which is nice, but I think I have come into a place where I'm surrounded by some others who at least want to, you know? And I'm telling you guys, and I'll be quiet at this point, but I'm telling you, like, God is looking for a person and a people who are after his own heart, and when he finds it, he will do, like, awesome stuff. Who has dreams about what God's going to do here? Me too, man. And I want to tell you, I believe when he finds a people who are after his own heart, like, it'll blow our dreams away. That's what I really believe. Here's what I want us to do tonight. I just want us to take some of this, and it's kind of, there's no, did you guys know there's no worship folks here tonight? I heard that, and you heard the good news. I'm not going to lead worship. I'm going to ask Tim. Tim's going to put some music on, and what I want to ask us to do is a little different than normal. But I want to ask us to go ahead. I want us to break. We've got a few minutes here, and I want us to break into some groups and kind of digest some of what we've been saying. And I want us to break into some groups. It's okay in this setting. We can like move some chairs and get in circles. And I want us to break in. You can divide it up. Don't just get with people you know. Get with somebody you don't know. And I want to see if we get just little circles, little groups of 6 or 7 people. That'll be about 5 or 6 groups or something like that. And we just break in those groups and pray through some of what we're hearing. But more importantly, I think pray. I want to ask you to pray for the people who are in your group.